the International Bible Knowledge Institute presents An Unorthodox Interpretation of Revelation by Randolph Dunn. Chapter 1. Background to Revelation. John the Apostle. Domitian was a believer in prophetic omens and insisted on calling himself a god. In about AD 86 a temple to Domitian was built in Ephesus. John's opposition to emperor worship, in addition to his continued preaching of the gospel of Christ, ultimately reached the ear of Domitian and prompted him to take action. In AD 94, the elderly John the Apostle was exiled to the island of Patmos. After Domitian's death, the apostle returned to Ephesus during the reign of Trajan, and at Ephesus he died about AD 100 at a great age. Jesus, as described in the New Testament, was most likely crucified on AD Friday, April 3, 33. The latest investigation, reported in the journal International Geology Review, focused on earthquake activity at the Dead Sea, located 13 miles from Jerusalem. Matthew 27 mentions that an earthquake coincided with the crucifixion, and when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split and the tombs broke open. Saul of Tarsus, Paul. While they were stoning Stephen, Stephen prayed, "Lord Jesus, receive my spirit." Then he fell on his knees and cried out, "Lord, do not hold this sin against them." When he had said this, he fell asleep, died. And Saul was there, giving approval to his death. On that day a great persecution broke out against the church at Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. Godly men buried Stephen and mourned deeply for him. But Saul began to destroy the church. Going from house to house, he dragged off men and women and put them in prison. Acts 7:59-8:3. The exact details of Paul's death are unknown, but tradition holds that he was beheaded in Rome and thus died as a martyr for his faith. His death was perhaps part of the executions of Christians ordered by the Roman Emperor Nero following the Great Fire in the city in 64 AD. Claudius, 41-54. With the murder of the Emperor Gaius, Caligula, in AD 41 Claudius became emperor, 41-54. Since the Jews were continually making disturbances at the instigations of Chrestus, Claudius expelled them from Rome. The Roman historian Suetonius wrote about events in Rome around AD 52. Chrestus may have been a thorn in the side of Roman politicos anxious to be rid of him and his cohorts. Or, Chrestus may be the way uninformed bureaucrats pronounced the name Christus about which Jews argued. Such arguments between Jews and Christians were not unknown, such as, in Ephesus. Acts 19. Claudius likely and inadvertently was the first emperor to persecute Christians, who were perceived as a Jewish sect, for, it seems, disturbing the peace. The plotting Agrippina managed to convince her husband, Claudius, to adopt her son Nero and put him, ahead of Claudius' own son, first in line for the throne. Maternal concern not satisfied, she then murdered Claudius, and Nero ruled the world at age 17, ruling from AD 54 to AD 68 when the Senate sentenced him to death for treason. Nero, 54-68. Nero, a man with light blue eyes, thick neck, protruding stomach, and spindly legs, was a crazed and cruel emperor, a pleasure-driven man who ruled the world by whim and fear. He eventually had his mother stabbed to death for treason and his wife Octavia beheaded for adultery. He then had Octavia's head displayed for his mistress, Poppaea, whom years later he kicked to death when she was pregnant. During the night of July 18, AD 64, fire broke out in the merchant area of the city of Rome. Fanned by summer winds, the flames quickly spread through the dry wooden structures of the imperial city. Soon the fire took on a life of its own, consuming all in its path for 6 days and 7 nights. When the conflagration finally ran its course, it left 70% of the city in smoldering ruins. Rumors soon arose accusing the Emperor Nero of ordering the torching of the city and standing on the summit of the Palatine playing his lyre as flames devoured the world around him. These rumors have never been confirmed. In fact, Nero rushed to Rome from his palace in Anzio, and ran about the city all that first night without his guards directing efforts to quell the blaze. But the rumors persisted and the emperor looked for a scapegoat. He found it in the Christians, at that time a rather obscure religious sect with a small following in the city. To appease the masses, Nero literally had his victims fed to the lions during giant spectacles held in the city's remaining amphitheater. From the ashes of the fire rose a more spectacular Rome. A city made of marble and stone with wide streets, pedestrian arcades and ample supplies of water to quell any future blaze. The debris from the fire was used to fill the malaria-ridden marshes that had plagued the city for generations. The historian Tacitus wrote, "Now started the most terrible and destructive fire which Rome had ever experienced. It began in the Circus, where it adjoins the Palatine and Cælian hills. Breaking out in shops selling inflammable goods, and fanned by the wind, the conflagration instantly grew and swept the whole length of the Circus. There were no walled mansions or temples, or any other obstructions, which could arrest it. First, the fire swept violently over the level spaces. Then it climbed the hills, but returned to ravage the lower ground again. It outstripped every countermeasure. The ancient city's narrow winding streets and irregular blocks encouraged its progress. Terrified, shrieking women, helpless old and young, people intent on their own safety, people unselfishly supporting invalids or waiting for them, fugitives and lingerers alike, all heightened the confusion. When people looked back, menacing flames sprang up before them or outflanked them. When they escaped to a neighboring quarter, the fire followed, even remote districts believed be involved. Finally, with no idea where or what to flee, they crowded on to the country roads, or lay in the fields. Some who had lost everything, even their food for the day, could have escaped, but preferred to die. So did others, who had failed to rescue their loved ones. Nobody dared fight the flames. Attempts to do so were prevented by menacing gangs. Torches were openly thrown in, by men crying that they acted under orders. Perhaps they had received orders. Or they may just have wanted to plunder unhampered. Nero was at Antium. He returned to the city only when the fire was approaching the mansion he had built to link the gardens of Maecenas to the Palatine. By the sixth day enormous demolitions had confronted the raging flames with bare ground and open sky, and the fire was finally stamped out at the foot of the Esquiline hill. But before panic had subsided, or hope revived, flames broke out again in the more open regions of the city. Here there were fewer casualties, but the destruction of temples and pleasure arcades was even worse. This new conflagration caused additional ill feeling, for people believed that Nero was ambitious to found a new city to be called after himself. Nero tried to pin the blame for that fire on the city's small Christian community, regarded as a distinct, dissident group of Jews, and so, he burned many of them alive. Peter and Paul were said to have been martyred as a result. But the rumors persisted that Nero had sung his own poem, The Sack of Troy. He did not fiddle, while enjoying the bright spectacle he had ignited. That business about singing was not unreasonable, for Nero had for years made a fool of himself by publicly playing the lyre and singing before, literally, command performances. The International Bible Knowledge Institute has more audio Bible lessons. So, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Also, our website, thebiblewayonline.com, has many other lessons that can be viewed online or downloaded, and it has links to several languages. Our hope is that these Bible lessons have brought you closer to God, and to have increased your desire to do His will.